Was Richard Allen a wolf in sheep's clothing, hiding in plain sight, or was he set up?
Was this odinism, or was this simply an evil man?
This is Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies.
Hello, my name is Jessica Della Davies. I'm an investigative journalist, and my job is to analyze crime scene data, look at potential suspects, and share with you how to do this. And you are looking for a channel that's going to bring you credible information, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. I would love to have you as part of the Reporter Room family. We have so much stuff to unpack in the Richard Allen case. So today we're going to be talking about Richard Allen. Were there more than one perpetrator involved in this crime? Is odinism worth considering or not? We're also going to look at the Ron Logan angle, and we're going to talk about Bridge Guy's physical stance, and I'm also going to mathematically show you why Richard Allen is still a very viable suspect. So we're going to be looking into this Richard Allen case beginning from a neutral spot, because there's been a lot of new information since the last time I covered it. So let's start with talking about the Ron Logan angle, and then I'm going to show you mathematically why it's more likely to be Richard Allen than not. And I also want to share with you some information on whether or not a ring was using this Anthony Shots Catfish account. Considering Ron Logan, if you don't know who Ron Logan is, his property is where Libby and Abby were found. Moreover, Ron Logan's girlfriend contends that it was Ron Logan who did this to Libby and Abby. If it was, and he passed away, and he's no longer here to defend himself, then would he have staged Libby and Abby on his own property? Because wouldn't this have been a surefire way to draw attention to himself? However, I think that while we're doing the investigation, we need to keep Ron Logan as a potential suspect, at least in relation to the idea that there was a ring of men using the Anthony Shots Catfish account. There are so many twists and turns. This case is absolutely crazy. If you don't know who Anthony Shots Catfish account, this was an innocent male model whose image was used by Kegan Kline to encourage young girls to send inappropriate, I'm watching my words here, photographs to this account. So I do believe it's possible that Ron Logan was involved in this account along with Richard Allen and Kegan Kline. So when I look at images of Bridge Guy, I don't see Ron Logan. I see the stance and build of Bridge Guy, and it more closely reflects the stance and build of Richard Allen. And I'm going to share with you more about that in just a moment, so please stay with me. I also think that the sketch of Bridge Guy, one of them does fit Richard Allen, but the other one does not. Let's talk about Richard Allen and his defense team. There's been so much controversy surrounding this trial, and they had their filing memo, and they had three objectives that they wanted to achieve. One was to get the search warrant tossed out in an effort to eliminate any evidence that was collected by law enforcement. They were not able to achieve this, but they certainly tried. Because the evidence links the bullet casing to Richard Allen's gun, and Richard Allen admits to being on the Monoon High Bridge that day, you can see why they were anxious to get that evidence tossed out. Number two is to create a narrative to the public to address the fact that Richard Allen confessed multiple times in recorded jailhouse phone calls. Now, did the defense team and Richard Allen see the Odin patches on some of the guards? Because I'm not disputing the guards were wearing the patches. I'm also not convinced that they forced Richard Allen to confess multiple times in jailhouse calls that were recorded. Remember, the initial reason that the defense team gave for Richard Allen's confessions was because he was under mental duress. This odinist theory was brought on weeks and weeks later when the first one didn't stick. So are they just trying to throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks? Their third objective was to publicly introduce a theory that they could use at Richard Allen's trial in an effort to create reasonable doubt. Now, I do believe that there were guards in the prison that were wearing the Odin patches. However, I'm not convinced that they forced Richard Allen to confess multiple times on the phone. I know people think that false confessions occur, and they do, but normally they occur during police interrogations and not during recorded phone calls with the perpetrator's wife. However, I do have concerns about the way Richard Allen was treated in prison. I do have concerns with the fact that Judge Gull removed his attorneys and appeared to install her crony attorneys, even though Richard Allen didn't want his attorneys to be removed. The defendant, Richard Allen, absolutely had a right to stay with his public defenders because this would have forced his trial to be delayed unduly for another year or more. So I think he also has a right to speak to his defense team in private. But I think both things can be true. I think it's possible that his rights to privacy were violated, but I also think that it's possible that Richard Allen confessed in the recorded jailhouse calls because he did it. Let's talk about how Richard Allen was treated in prison, and then we're going to talk more about this Anthony Shots account and whether or not there was a ring. And then I'm going to show you mathematically probability that it was Richard Allen. So please stay with me. Judge Gull is still on the case, and now the two defense attorneys, well, we know what she thinks of them because she removed them from the case. Now, I believe that there were a ring of men using the Anthony Shots Catfish account. So I think there are more people involved than just Richard Allen and Kegan Kline. So let's consider prosecutor Leland's stand back in 2022. He said, quote, "We have good reason to believe that Mr. Allen is not the only actor involved in these heinous crimes," end quote. I believe prosecutor Leland. I believe that there were more people behind the Anthony Shots account than just Richard Allen. We know from the court documents that Richard Allen admitted to his wife in recorded calls that he is responsible for doing away with Libby and Abby. And authorities believe that a knife was used. We didn't know what the weapon was. We know from the second document that the confessions made by Richard Allen to his wife, Kathy, that this call took place on April 3rd of 2023. We're told that Kathy ended the call abruptly, so it sounds like she hung up on Richard Allen. Now, according to the prosecutor, Richard Allen confessed 5 or 6 times to doing away with Libby and Abby. So I think this is a big problem for the defense team. But Richard Allen's attorneys have not shown any evidence of him being coerced to make these confessions. All they've shown us are some patches on some prison guards. And I'm not saying that there aren't some white supremacist prison guards. I'm sure that there are, and I believe that these patches were being worn. But for all we know, the defense team saw the patches and decided that since the mental problems that, the mental deficiencies that their client was having, and that this forced him to confess, which is what they first put out to all of us. That's the first statement they put out. Since that wasn't getting any traction, did they see the patches and decide that this would be a good theory? Because people, let's face it, they love a great conspiracy theory. What do you guys think? Richard Allen's attorneys are also claiming that he's under great physical and mental duress because of his time in prison, and they don't think his admission can be relied upon. And I'm not disagreeing that he's under mental and physical duress, but is this because he's in prison or because he got caught and his wife hung up on him? I mean, both could be true. He could be under duress in prison. I'm sure it's not a fun place to be. He could also be mentally disturbed because he did this and confessed it to his wife. Richard Allen reportedly confessed multiple times in recorded phone calls. So do you think it's possible that these confessions were coerced, or is the defense team just doing anything to try to get him off the hook? After all, the bullet casing found at the scene matched the gun that Richard Allen had. Now let's go back to 2017. We know Richard Allen went in and talked to law enforcement. He placed himself on the trail that day, brought to light again in October of 2022 when law enforcement took a second look at Richard Allen. Apparently, something had been misfiled by an FBI agent. The statement that Richard Allen came in and gave was not placed with the other statement. So this whole thing fell through the cracks. At least that's the theory we're being told. Now, I believe Kegan Kline led law enforcement to Richard Allen, and I believe he did this in exchange for pleading guilty to some lesser offenses. I have always shared with you that I believe that there were multiple men behind the Anthony Shots account, which was being run by Kegan Kline. So was Richard Allen also accessing this account? Why was he on the Monoon High Bridge that day? Another problem for Richard Allen is that he's told law enforcement that he had guns and knives in his home. He admitted to having similar clothing to the one worn by Bridge Guy. Now, Libby German uploaded this video to Snapchat and may have helped solve her own case, just like Paul Murdaugh did in the Alex Murdaugh case. Kathy Allen, who is Richard Allen's wife, admits that Richard Allen owns a blue jacket similar to the one worn by Bridge Guy. Again, this would be a big coincidence. What do you think? Let's consider the fact that there are only between 2,800 and 3,000 people living in Delphi. Now, we believe that this was someone that lived there because this Monoon High Bridge is kind of remote, so it's unlikely that a tourist or an outsider would have known to go scope out victims on this bridge. So I believe this was a local. So we're going to take the women out of the group of the 2,800 to 3,000 people. That reduces the number by half. So it should be 1,400 to 1,500 people left on the list. Now, let's consider the demographics and race in Delphi. This would reduce the number further to around 1,200 men. So now let's remove all of the males who are under the age of 40 and over the age of 50. So now we have less than 200 men. Now let's look at the height, weight of Bridge Guy. He's a little bit paunchy. He's around 5'6", 5'7". So this reduces it down even further. And this brings us down to less than 100 guys that this could have been. So now let's consider out of the 100 or so men left, who was on the bridge that day? Well, Richard Allen puts himself on the bridge that day. Thank you so much for joining me on the Richard Allen case. It was so great to be able to spend this time with you. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Subscribe, and I look forward to reading your comments.